Hi, Dimitri! They've only had the big camera. I know him!
All right, welcome. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dimitri Broxson. I'm the Senior Director of Education here at MOAD. And welcome to our second annual symposium. All right, first I'd like to take a moment to thank and acknowledge our phenomenal sponsors who made this event possible. This year's Engage Symposium is generously funded by Art Bridges, the Zellerbach Family Foundation, the Yerba Buena Benefit District, and all of you sitting here to make this program happen. And also all of those of you who are members and support MOAD throughout the year. So today's event has been in the works for the last year, and I'm thrilled that today has finally arrived. Yeah, it's been a long way coming. Before I dive into our unbelievable lineup of guests, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the themes that drove the content of today's symposium. The exhibition on our second and third floors, entitled Black Refractions, Selections from the Studio Museum in Harlem, features an unparalleled selection of a little over 60 works by artists of African descent from the Studio Museum in Harlem's permanent collection. MOAD's presentation is the first of a six-stop cross-country tour of this incredible art collection, which features artists such as Barclay Hendricks, Kehinde Wiley, Micheline Thomas, Njideka Akunyili Crosby, Corey Newkirk, and Henry Taylor, just to name a few. And there's Corey right there. The exhibition, sorry about that, I can't help myself. This exhibition is sure to contribute in profound ways to the national dialogue about art made by artists of African descent. The collection we have on display is incredibly diverse, with artists focusing on representation of Black portraiture, the repositioning of historical images and moments, abstractions that were previously and falsely believed by many art historians to be only the purview of white male artists, deeply personal narratives, and reinterpretation of material. The pieces date to as far back as the 19th century, all the way through the present. The oldest piece in this collection that we have here is a piece by Bill Traylor upstairs on the third floor. Traylor was born in Alabama when the institution of slavery was still legal in America. On the other end of the spectrum are living legends like Carrie Mae Weems, Titus Kaphar, and Mark Bradford. This sounds like a ton of content for only one exhibition, but in actuality, I'm only touching upon the tip of the iceberg here. That's just how profound and important this exhibition is to the art historical landscape. To whittle such an expansive exhibition down to only two core topics is almost impossible. But working with my colleagues here at MOAD, we did the best we could possibly do to cover the issues that traverse all the pieces of Black Refractions. And honestly, it doesn't hurt to have 10 certified geniuses as panelists. The two panel discussions that we're presenting today fall under two very broad umbrellas. First, on artists of African descent, and secondly, artists as a social change agent. These seemingly cavernous topics were not chosen by accident. In addition to the art included in the exhibition, I carefully consulted with some of the most important books ever written on the topics of African descendant art and artists. These books include Bridget Cook's Exhibiting Blackness, African Americans and the American Art Museum. This book raises some really important questions such as, is there a future for the all Black show in the American Mainstream Museum? Has the racial thinking within American Art Museum administration changed enough for the institution to reflect the contribution of African Americans in American art? Do exhibitions of art by African Americans serve a symbolic function in mainstream art museums to prove that America is truly a democratic nation? I also consulted Aruna D'Souza's book, Whitewalling, Art, Race, and Protest in 3 Acts. And by the way, I'll be posting the story downstairs. This book examines a nearly 40-year span of time from the 1969 exhibition Harlem on My Mind to Dana Schutz's Open Casket, which stirred up issues many thought we had moved past when it was presented at the 2017 Whitney Biennial. D'Souza's book demands historical accountability and for the art world to abandon the stance of neutrality regarding racism in museums and galleries. At the same time, her book celebrates the path-breaking of direct action groups such as the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, which included artist leader Howardina Pindell. It's not on right now, but that screen's on the video, the small screen back there. You can see that later. Entitled Free White in 21. For me, D'Souza's book also raises questions of who has the authority to tell a story, especially as it pertains to people of color when those at the helm of art institutions are more often than not non-people of color. I consulted, next, Jacqueline France's book, Making Race, Modernism and Racial Art in America, which examines 3 New York City artists who were assigned the category of racial art during the interwar years of the 20th century. Dr. Francis's book raises questions of what it means to be an artist of color and whether the work of an artist of color needs to contain aesthetic cues pointing to the artist's cultural identity. Next, I consulted Dr. Lee Rafer's book that she most recently co-edited, Migrating the Black Body, the African Diaspora and Visual Culture, which examines how visual media has shaped diasporic imaginings of the individual and collective self. The essays in Migrating the Black Body examine how artists across the African diaspora navigate relations to one another across space and time and through visual culture. The essays also examine how non-Black artists have deployed representations of Blackness to define their own sense of identity. To round out all the scholarship, I invited 2 of the most important living artists of our time, LA-based artists Corey Newkirk and Henry Taylor. Corey's beaded curtain, which is in the back right there. Not Corey, his curtain, his artwork. And Corey, entitled So Long 612, repurposes plastic pony beads, which are so closely tied to African Americans and their hair, and he transforms them into a landscape reminiscent of his hometown in upstate New York. Henry Taylor is a prolific painter who for decades has painted colorful depictions of friends, family, intriguing passersby, and historically significant individuals. Without much regard for his art world status or the art market, Taylor has recently skyrocketed into the status of one of the most important living artists of our time. I invited Mariane Ibrahim, the game-changing gallerist whose self-named gallery in Seattle successfully seeks to create an environment for people to look at art by mostly artists of African descent and view it through a normalized lens. I invited Aaron Cristobal, co-founder of Black Radical Imagination, and assistant curator at the Hammer Museum of Los Angeles. Cristobal's Made in LA biennials have generated a buzz in the art world that has placed her on the world stage and earned her the title of one of the 10 most influential curators to watch. I invited my colleague Emily Kuhlmann, MOAD's Director of Exhibitions and Curatorial Affairs, who was instrumental. Emily was instrumental in making the selections and arranging the works from the Studio Museum that you see on view today at MOAD. Last and far from least, I invited Naima J. Keith. Naima is someone who is difficult to summarize in just a few sentences and impossible, actually. She is currently the Deputy Director and Chief Curator at Los Angeles' California African American Museum. And just on Thursday, 2 days ago, the announcement was made that she is headed to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art to take on the role of Vice President of Education and Public Programs. Keith is credited with transforming CAM into the must-visit destination it is today in LA's Exposition Park. Of profound importance to today's conversation, Naima Keith served as a curator at the Studio Museum in Harlem from 2011 to 2016. At the Studio Museum, Naima curated a traveling exhibition, Charles Gaines, Gridwork 1974 to 1989, which was the first museum survey of the influential artist's work. She curated Rodney McMillan Views of Main Street. She co-organized multidisciplinary Afrofuturist exhibition, The Shadows Took Shape, and she organized an earlier exhibition of the Studio Museum's permanent collection. These projects are just a mere blip of when examining all the incredible, important exhibitions, programs, and initiatives that Naima has developed over the course of her career. You may have also noticed that all of our panelists have a strong connection to the West Coast. This was intentional. While the Studio Museum in Harlem is one of the premier institutions focusing on artists of African descent and its influence are global, the museum's placement in New York inherently makes it the strongest, or its impact the strongest on the East Coast. For the purposes of today's symposium, and because it is being held at MOAD in San Francisco, we chose to take a deep exploration of work being done by artists, curators, gallerists, and scholars here on the West Coast. Since visual art is never an isolated form of cultural expression, we decided to delight you with the catered lunch by Renee Johnson's Blackberry Soul. We'll get that at noon. You also saw earlier, we invited master kora player Keenan Webster, Raisa Simpson's Push Dance Company, and Moon Candy. These are all Bay Area performing artists who are making waves in their disciplines. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Now it is my extreme pleasure to welcome Ms. Naima J. Keith.
Good morning, everyone. And Dimitri, thank you so much for that spirited and thorough introduction. I think we all enjoyed seeing our books and work highlighted in such a spirited way. So thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure the microphone is closer. So I am quite honored to be here today as we celebrate the incredible exhibition on view at MOAD. During my tenure at the Studio Museum in Harlem from 2011 to 2016, I got a chance to get to know a number of these works quite well. So it's great to see them again here in San Francisco. In many ways, this exhibition and the larger collection at the Studio Museum in Harlem is a profound reminder of the incredible contributions of artists of color, contributions that have too often not been amplified. Their voices and perspectives as it is and as it could be. This morning, I want to talk about museum collections and the issue of diversity. Like many of you, I have read the recent headlines about the ways in which museums, such as the Baltimore Museum of Art or SF MoMA, are looking to diversify their collections, either by raising money through a special acquisition fund or by selling work by blue chip artists. Actually, next. I didn't realize. That was and then next. So these are just a number of the headlines that have come out over the last year or so about museums selling work from their collection. The issue was also brought to the fore last week when art activist group Radical Matriarchy had a Valentine's Day protest outside of Washington's National Gallery, calling attention to the need for greater diversity in the museum's collection. The group said that 90% of artworks in the gallery were by white men, with less than 3% by people of color. But while I want to be supportive of the Baltimore Museum of Art, for example, looking to correct the lack of representation in their own collections, especially since equity is what we have all wanted for so long, I still feel a bit uneasy, and I'm not sure why. As more and more museums move in the direction and effort to broaden the canon, how much of it translates into long-term action? How are museums defining success? Especially since any acquisition would pale in comparison to the number of works already in the collection by Caucasian male artists. Should we be concerned that financial support for these acquisitions are coming from the sale of work versus the board or institutional stakeholders? I love this crowd. Wow, this is to meet you. They throw me off a little bit because everything sorry, I was like, it's very interactive. Like, is that me or can I hear my inner thoughts? Sorry. Anyway, and finally, how will these initiatives and this surge of interest impact African American museums, many of whom have been committed to doing this work, but are now priced out of buying art by more established artists of color? While I don't have the answers to many of these questions, especially since these issues are unfolding in real time, I wanted to take the opportunity to raise these issues to hopefully ignite a dialogue about current efforts to diversify the canon. The first painting to enter the Studio Museum's collection was Elsa Corder's The Room. It was made in 1949, but gifted to the museum in 1971, several years after the institution was founded. It depicts a young woman with her eyes closed and a serene expression on her face in a small bedroom. The dark red curtain and brass bed sits askew next to her. Corder observed that he has frequently, quote, worked with what's around me, though sometimes I reach back for something out of my memory, end quote. And the room is filled with such references. The majority of the composition focuses on a woman, but there are also references to newspaper and magazine pages. Quote, the Black woman represents the Black race. She is the Black spirit. She conveys a feeling of eternity and continuance of life, end quote. The facial structure of the woman recalls the influence of African sculpture, while the setting references the long tradition in European art of images of interior spaces and the women who inhabit them. Corder's female figure is surrounded by waning gentility, seen in the peeling paint and wallpaper. The artist selected a frame, which I didn't have here, an image of here, but trust me. The artist selected a frame with a worn and distressed finish to enhance the mood of his composition. While it entered the collection 3 years after its founding, the Studio Museum did not begin as a collecting institution. As said by Eleanor Holmes Norton, then vice president of the museum, when you have the vested interests of a collection, you lose the desire to innovate. We're trying to do something other museums are not. We want to show new work that the older establishments aren't onto. And of course, that includes artists of all ethnic groups. The gift of Corder's The Room by a private collector is then very surprising. But it was the persistence of early donors, most of whom were artists, who foresaw the importance of a permanent collection, in spite of the museum's original insistence that it would not be a collecting institution. Since then, the Studio Museum has become one of the country's preeminent collectors of African American art. To date, the Studio Museum's collection has grown to well over 2,000 works by 500 artists, working in a variety of media, including painting, sculpture, photography, video, installation, and more recently, performance. The subject of museum collections has become a significant topic of the last year, and many mainstream museums are grappling with the desire for not just staff and board diversity, but collection diversity as well. In a recent article for ArtNet, 2 writers dug deep into the research surrounding the surge of interest in African American art. Despite achieving greater popularity and prominence today more than ever, the needle has not moved nearly far enough when it comes to full representation in museum collections. Frankly, I myself was surprised at the extent of the glaring imbalance. After all, today, virtually everyone seems to be in agreement that greater diversity and representation are vital. The numbers, looking at 30 leading museums over a 10-year period, were startling. They were a reminder of the imbalances and narrow perspectives that have restrained the voices of people of color in our public life, culture, and national dialogue. According to their research, last year, on one level, the number of solo and thematic exhibitions focusing on the work of African American artists jumped almost 66%. to 63 shows, from 38 shows in 2016. So 38 shows over 30 museums in 2016. Over the past decade, purchases and gifts of works of art by African American artists accounted for a mere 2.4% of all acquisitions by the 30 museums surveyed. Even starker is the fact that 4 of the 30 museums that completed or submitted their data had 1% of all of their acquisitions devoted to artists of color. Many of the acquisitions acquired at auctions tend to be dominated by a few major names, all gifted and deserving of our admiration, but skewing the sum of the market to a few superstars. It remains, so sorry it's so small, I didn't know how big the screen was, but as you can see, those are the top, the best-selling artists at auction: Mark Bradford, Glenn Ligon, Curatorial, Marshall, Julie Moretti, and David Hammonds, and you kind of see the imbalance. So you should definitely look up this article to see the numbers greater, but essentially you see how little, for example, Romare Bearden, for example, accounts of the market, or artists that you would have thought, Nick Cave, for example. Again, this is over a 10-year period. So, Hale Woodruff, 3 exhibitions over a 10-year period, and only accounts for $5,000 of the total markup. So, just to kind of give you a sense of the numbers. So it remains an open question of how the next generation, after Mark Bradford, Glenn Ligon, Julie Moretti, for example, will find the visibility they need for their work to break through. And keep in mind that today the combined auction value of work by our African American artists is $2.2 billion, just 1.2% of the global total. The sad irony is that in substance, this is an incredible time for African American art. Kerry James Marshall's Mastery retrospective, for example, was a true blockbuster. Long overdue attention is finally being focused on artists like Betty Saar and Norman Lewis. Overall, the number of solo and thematic exhibitions focused on work by African American artists has jumped in recent years. But while a painting by Jean-Michel Basquiat is valued on the marketplace unlike anything that could have been imagined in the 80s and early 90s, he remains not only exceptional, but an exception. One set of infographics on the imbalance in the art world went as far as to create a chart that specifically compared auction sales of Basquiat to everyone else. So this is so the blue one is Basquiat, and that's everyone else. Museums have, and by and large, only seem to begin to wake up to the reality that the works in their galleries aren't illustrative or representative of the vibrant communities just outside their doors. This, of course, has something to do with the composition of those in the room making the decisions. The Mellon Foundation has pointed out that only about 16% of leadership positions in art museums are held by people of color. In a time of profound budget challenges, many museums are actively exploring how to correct the imbalance, even embracing deaccessioning, as in the Baltimore Museum of Art's decision. Some may think controversial in some circles, but they're doing that because Baltimore is 64% Black. So they're they have auctioned off works by Andy Warhol and Robert Rauschenberg to make room for more work by artists of color, particularly women. So this is an example of this work by Interdeca is an example of work they have since purchased after selling work in their collection. But while I'm grateful that more in positions of authority are waking up to the responsibility to ensure that a wider range of voices are heard, I am skeptical of the long-term commitment. In a Baltimore Sun op-ed, David Merrill, president of the Herman Merrill Foundation and the Sun's artist, wrote, quote, "The use of deaccession, selling 7 paintings to achieve the goal of supporting local or regional contemporary art, is a horrendous decision. What is especially troubling is the somewhat jubilant and self-righteous tone surrounding what the museum is doing. Never mind the positive spin the Baltimore Museum puts on this decision, such as insisting it's conducting routine museum business. Nothing could be further from reality," end quote. Nonetheless, the responses to the BMA's announcement, especially from curators and artists of color, have been overwhelmingly positive. Chris Bedford, who's the director of the Baltimore Museum, is demonstrating what should happen in museums and cultural institutions in the 21st century, according to Dr. Leslie King Hammond, former dean at MICA and nationally known curator. You have to be bold, you have to be a visionary. You have to step forward and make what's sometimes misconstrued as radical decisions, when in fact it's just addressing the overall quality, content, and intent of the institution's role in community. He is looking at the landscape of museum culture with fresh eyes and not repeating ubiquitous knee-jerk decisions made in the past, end quote. Places like the Cleveland Museum of Art have not only acquired more works by African-American artists in recent years, but launched a comprehensive plan for instilling greater diversity, equity, and inclusion in every facet of museum operations, including how they hire and train employees and their approach to acquiring new works. I know that museums can be a catalyst for driving change. I have seen it firsthand in our work at the California African American Museum. Institutions like CAM, the Studio Museum, and MOAD, and others have and always will be bedrocks for supporting artists of color, no matter what's happening in the trend lines elsewhere. The same is true for smaller institutions that have made it a priority to support their local constituents. The Columbus Museum in Georgia, for example, is one of the first to acquire major works by Alma Thomas and Amy Sherrill, who were both born in the city. The museum plans to organize a major Alma Thomas retrospective, for example, in 2020. But as I reflect upon the efforts of several museums to correct the historical canon, I'm reminded of the evolution of the museum itself. We can no longer conceive of the museum as a repository for unquestioned masterpieces, but as a living organism, open to debate, preserving the past, and interpreting it according to the priorities of the present. This shift reflects a new emphasis on correcting the blind spots and biases of the past. The purported universality of the white male artist's perspective is no longer a given, but is now seen as a form of oppressive, obscuring the contributions and innovations of women, people of color, and artists working outside of the Western arts world centers. The inclusion of such works, either rescued from deep storage or now being purchased, serves as an important historical corrective, giving certain artists a belated recognition and blurring the familiar borders of canonical movements. Exhibitions like Black Refractions, show what is possible when curators of vision make a commitment to the best of what the mainstream has ignored. In closing, while I'm cautiously optimistic about these initiatives, I recognize they may keep museums from falling further behind. We, the public, to whom the museum owes a more holistic and thus more accurate picture of art and its history, will be watching closely. Thank you. Okay, so I guess Dimitri said we're opening up for questions. Oh, wow, and that's my sister, so I planted her as a mold.
I promise it's on topic. I found the article that you referenced in all the charts and graphs really riveting. Would you be able to tweet that out or share that through our social handles just so we can all populate?
Yes. So it was a fantastic article. It was posted via ArtNet and also a podcast called In Other Worlds. There's an extensive survey, both with these infographics and just a lot of research just about, like I said, these 30 museums over a 10-year period. The authors of the article actually reached out to me while they were doing their research to share that they were doing it, to kind of get my thoughts, and I said that I was surprised. Again, just I think given the popularity of African-American art in the last several years, I thought that the acquisitions would have jumped just because of the number of exhibitions that are happening. So I was not only surprised that acquisitions had not jumped, but as nearly as much as I would have thought, but also that there actually aren't that many exhibits. So there are, again, in comparison to maybe another time, but not nearly enough. But I think with the acquisition number is what really startled me. Yes.
Thank you for a fantastic talk. I just wanted to point out that there's just this past week a new data set has come out.
Yes.
From Williams College, where a mathematician friend of mine, based on a cranky Facebook post that I made a couple of years ago, scraped the data from major museums in the U.S. and sort of it has put very precise numbers on the number of women, the number of people of color, the number of women of color, the number of all of these different groups, and found that the numbers even among permanent collections of encyclopedic museums are just startling. so combined with the exhibition numbers that you gave, I think you give a really sort of incredibly useful picture of what we're dealing with as a baseline.
Yeah. No, it's thank you. Yeah, no. So Williams College professor, just in case anyone can hear, yes, there's been a number of articles that have come out over the last literally month. I mean, even I heard there was an an article about SF MoMA's decision to sell Orozco, even this morning, actually. So these are all kind of happening right now, and that's actually why I wanted to talk about it, because I'm still trying to understand my own feelings towards what's happening in these decisions.
So I just wanted to just jump in and say that, one of the things that's so problematic is the way in which museums seem to be constantly give over space militarily to Black artists and not make the investment of real estate, which is as you're putting out the collections development side of it, right? And so they get the advantage, predominantly white institutions get the advantage of looking like they're diversifying, even though those numbers, as you point out, are problematic, but looking like they're making change, where when it comes to long-term historical archival collection stuff, they're not actually giving over that sort of space because of whatever mission statement. So
yeah, I'm also just curious on how many risks they're taking in terms of artists that are not market proven, right? So are they looking at the artists that are less popular, or they're just trying to correct, okay, we don't have Jack Whitten, so we have to purchase Jack Whitten, versus saying, okay, who's kind of Jack Whitten of today, or doing both? Obviously, I don't want Jack to not be included in collections, but I just wonder how much they're kind of going for. So I don't want to call on Angie because she works at SF MoMA, but yes, of course.
Exactly.
I actually have a question about going forward. So, because I am working for a collecting institution for the first time in 20 years, just in the last year and a half, and it's come across in my head, like what is the appropriate method? Because I'm not necessarily in agreement about the deaccession plan either, not for us at this time, but as a long-term plan, right? So, I mean, we had a meeting not long ago with one of our trustees asked the question, what about Asian American artists? All this talk about artists of color, it seems to mean Black artists. So I also want to bring that up, that we, the Studio Museum's original goal, the New Museum's original goal, that so many of our, really foundational alternative museums had a bigger vision of the United States, that, we're getting played here. All of us are getting played when we go back to, the kind of lowest common denominator of, okay, let's just make people feel comfortable because we have examples of representation in our collection. So how do you see, you're about to make a big move. How do you see what we should be doing, as colleagues across museums who, where we have different levels of influence and control? What should we do?
That's a great question, and of course, that's a hard question. Again, I think I want to talk about this today because I honestly don't know. I'm still trying to kind of, on one level, I recognize that Orozco can command millions and millions of dollars, which could then, mean that you could purchase 30, 50, 75, works by artists of color, any number of works, right? So on one level, I understand, I guess, where somewhere like Baltimore, which is, predominantly African American, wants to make those kind of corrective measures. But in terms of what we can do in the future, I guess advocacy is the biggest. I think.
But are we thinking like African American collection? Are we thinking that we want to raise money to bring African American artists into the country? Do we want to raise a fund to bring Asian American? Do we want to separate this? Do we what kinds of approaches should we be thinking about? Just
yeah. Like I said, so on one level, there is, so Franklin, right? Obviously, Perez, he has an African American art fund, is doing quite well. They just had a major fundraiser. Exactly, Franklin Sermons, who's at the Perez Art Museum, director of the Perez Art Museum. They have an African American art fund. They just had a major fundraiser for it. It did quite well. He's been able to make a number of purchases to add to the Perez Museum's collection. So that's a positive, right? That's a step in the right direction. There's a part of me that wants a separate fund for African American arts to make sure it's a priority, right? So because there was a fund, that means there are dedicated money that can't be used for other things. At the same time, again, if it's less popular, right, so if we go towards another moment, or what does it mean for Native American art? What does it mean for, there's so many areas that are deserving of attention. So, you know, again, I guess the idea for me, it seems the dedicated fund seems to be the most, I don't want to say the popular, but I mean in terms of like the way in which it stays on people's radars, right? The way in which that focus on something remains. So my immediate reaction is to maintain or to at least establish a fund for African American art, so there's a constant stream of money kind of coming into a devoted area. But again, long term, I'm just not sure. I worry that this is a fad, really, and that once it kind of falls out of favor, then it's going to end. So again, that's where I'm kind of want to think through. Yes.
This is kind of an absurd question, but I'm not a museum professional, so I feel like
Let's do it.
what is the likelihood of more substantial collaborations among museums, long-term collaborations that would really look at collections as collective rather than institutional, to break down those barriers? Absurdity wins.
No, I guess that's a fantastic idea. I mean, I think rather than it just kind of staying static, obviously we lend and you know, borrow amongst each other all the time. So there are definitely ways in which we share our collections now, but I do agree that maybe thinking of a more collective model. But you know, I do worry that the relationship will then take away from the responsibility of that institution, right? So them saying, oh, because we get it all the time at the California African American Museum, right? Where people reach out to us, oh, we would love to collaborate with you on X, Y, and Z. And I'm always like, yes, because I think it's great for a certain artist to get a certain level of visibility, or for them to be in conversation with certain audiences and that kind of thing. So if it makes sense for us, we do it. At the same time, I do wonder if it takes away from what the museum should be doing long term, right? They're kind of using this partnership as a way to say, you know, this is good for what we're doing, but maybe not making the commitment themselves.
Right, and I guess what I'm wondering is whether there are really like new models that are
Yeah.
beyond sharing of, you know, lending of art, or even these temporary partnerships that just break that open. And again, as not a curator,
No, goes on. We're quick on this side, and I'll come right back to it. And then I guess 2 more questions. Okay, Lee.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you for the provocation for us to think together this moment as an opportunity and a kind of profound ambivalence, right, about what it means. And I think the key words for me is sort of vacillating between diversity on one hand, right, about inclusion and equity, and then I think also decolonization on the other hand, right, which is actually about rethinking our relationship to soft power, like the role of museum of soft power, and rethinking the question of to whom does art belong. And I think that's really the struggle, like in this moment, right? And I think and it's less of a question, more than just kind of putting it out there as something for us to really think about through the course of the day.
No, I certainly agree. I mean, I think it, you know, I've of course been thinking about this since the Baltimore Museum announced they were doing it, and then when SF MoMA also announced that they were doing it as well, it just kind of like, okay, this is, I don't say it's gonna turn into a trend, but I was just kind of like, oh, okay, you know, this is not just an isolated thing. So Christopher Bedford has now written, you know, he wrote at Freeze Magazine, a number of responses to what he was doing at Baltimore. But again, I think that the latest announcement just got me thinking about, are more and more museums gonna start doing this? And then kind of, and what does that mean? Last one.
So, just for disclosure, I am associated with but also no different. And the question for you is, you know, you now have a big platform. What are your priorities on the back end? Obviously, you haven't started working with it. What will be the difference?
So yes, this was recently announced this past week that I'll be leaving the California African American Museum. My last day is on March 8th, and I'll be joining LACMA on April 1st, taking 3 weeks off. So I'll be joining LACMA. I'll be the Vice President of Education and Public Programs, so I'll actually not be curating there. But I'll still be curating Prospect New Orleans, which is opening October 2020, and then working with Expo Chicago. So I'm still doing another cultural project. That's my sister. Anyway, so yeah, so in my capacity at LACMA, I won't necessarily be overseeing acquisitions and that kind of thing, but I do think, in my role in public programs education, really thinking about how we can change things up. Actually, Arun and I were talking this morning, and she was reminding me just how a lot of activism in museums often starts in the education department. And she was saying, basically the look of like, shake things up, girl. So, which I plan to do already, but I think that, Michael Govan, the director of LACMA, has really seen LACMA as an opportunity to spread throughout the city. And what really attracted me to the position, being an Angelino, is the fact that there's going to be LACMA, satellites everywhere, and the idea that we can bring art to different people, but also bring conversations to different people, and in neighborhoods that are woefully underserved. And so for me, the idea of like bringing artists in conversation and enlivening art and thinking about art in a different way is what I want to do. So if I can then start conversations around collecting, start conversations around what it means to, be a socially engaged artist, those are things that I want to do with the institution, but I won't necessarily have the role of acquisitions. That doesn't mean I can't nudge my colleagues, yeah, so. Yeah, sure, Anji.
I want to say that in terms of this issue of, this current moment being bad, I just also want to remind you that a lot of people invested a long time, long before those of us in this room, and that among your colleagues who are still working, be it Thelma or Franklin, there's been this whole desire and effort to be mentors to bring up the next generation. So I just want to say
Oh, thank you, Anji. Thank you.
Right here.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jacqueline Francis, and I'm so happy to see so many people here this morning, not only for our great keynote speaker, Naima King, but of course this panel called On Artists of African Descent. Happy Black History Month. So what I want to do is briefly intro our panelists this morning, and then I'll ask some questions which I think will follow a sort of cleverly organized set of keywords. And those keywords for our panelists are mentors, origins, audience, and dreams, which is an acronym for MOAD. Okay, and then we'll have questions. So what I'd like to do, as I said, is introduce our panelists, and I'll start with our host. Emily A. Kuhlmann has been engaged at MOAD in various capacities since 2011. She organized past exhibitions such as the Grace Jones Project of 2016, Where Is Here of 2017, The Ease of Fiction of 2017 as well. As Director of Exhibitions and Curatorial Affairs, she has curated various solo artist exhibitions, including Allison Sarr, Bearing, 2016, A Matter of Fact, Toye and Odutola of 2016, and Todd Gray, My Life in the Bush with MJ and Iggy of 2017. And most recently, she co-curated Black Refractions, selections from the Studio Museum in Harlem. Emily received her Bachelor of Arts from the University of California, Irvine in art history. Yeah, there's Bridget over there, representing the entire Irvine faculty. With a minor in women's studies. Returning back to the Bay Area, she received her Master's of Arts in Visual and Critical Studies from the California College of the Arts in 2013. Her research interests include performance studies and critical race art history. Henry Taylor, sitting next to her, is one of the leading figurative painters working today, celebrated for narrative works that often capture African-American urban life with deep honesty. Born in Ventura, California in 1958, Taylor received his BFA in art from CalArts in 1995. Taylor also works with sculpture and film. He has had solo exhibitions at MoMA PS1, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Santa Monica Museum of Art. He was included in the 2017 Whitney Biennial and in the acclaimed exhibition Blues for Smoke, which was shown at MoCA and other museums. In 2018, Taylor received the prestigious Robert De Niro Senior Prize, which is great for figurative artists such as himself, as a senior De Niro was, which recognizes significant and innovative contributions to the field of painting. Friends and family members, celebrities, subjects in the news, and people whom he meets on the street all figure in his figure paintings, in which the mundane with dynamic use of color and spatial juxtapositions. Sitting next to Henry is Mariane Ibrahim, who was born in New Caledonia and raised in Somalia and France. She's the founder of the Mariane Ibrahim Gallery in Seattle, Washington in 2012, which is now moving to Chicago.
Wow.
Following. She works with a roster of primarily African artists while maintaining a presence at international art fairs. Her global roster of artists frame Africa and its diaspora as part of the contemporary world and not as a colonial fantasy. In 2017, she won the Presence Booth Prize of $10,000 for presentation of a work by the German-Ghanaian artist Zora Opoku at the Armory Show in New York. Ibrahim has dedicated her gallery to showcasing African artists, particularly those working in different parts of the world. So again, let us give our panelists a round of applause. So I'd like to start with thinking about mentors, and maybe I'll start on this end with Mariane. Could you talk a little bit about mentors for you as a gallerist and maybe just someone interested in cultural production?
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for inviting me. Very honored to be sitting next to a great master. And to be part of this program. In terms of mentors, I've had many different kind of mentors, collectors, curators, artists as well. But it was very difficult the time when I was thinking of opening the gallery to find a mentor because I couldn't find any Black artists around there. So I was sort of navigating because I was raised in France and I was living in Paris when I was thinking about doing the art representation, the artist representation. And it came to me as a difficult reality because all of the African art you would see in Paris were mostly traditional art. And so there were all of these colonial trophies in prestigious galleries in Saint-Germain-des-Prés where there was a African security guard and there was a buzzer and you couldn't even get in the galleries. So while I was sort of navigating in that world with young African artists, they were also living with the reality that no galleries wanted to represent them. And so that was a difficult reality because I was the commerce person. I was the one who would go and knock at the doors and trying to get representation for those artists. And the response that I got from most of them was, we don't have the market. And that was back in 2001. So my reaction was, but if you don't have the market, you have to create it. Because Africa is literally next door, and you have the possibility of addressing African art to African artists. And there's going to be a group of young collectors that will come through, and that will want to consume their art from their peers. So I don't want to deviate from your question in terms of mentoring, but there has been a lot of different interventions of people, not discouraging, but sort of saying like, your time will come. And I've heard that many times, and I think most importantly, the African American have heard that many times. So when I sort of moved to the US for more like personal reason, I took the chance of creating the gallery. The idea was to stay 2 years in Seattle. And here I am 8 years later, moving to Chicago, and I think I'm not gonna go back to France. I realized going back to France, it's nice when you're a tourist. So in terms of that mentoring, I wish I had more mentors, African descent mentors in the art business, but I didn't. And so I had to create an idea, and I had to create my own story and my own practice. And now I'm seeing young women getting into the art dealing and reaching out from different places. And I'm hoping that there will be more coming, not to be a mentor, but just to give them a few tips.
I think they're coming.
Mr. Taylor, could you please use the microphone, sir? It's on, it's live, it's hot.
Good. Did you know Noah Davis? Wait, no, Noah Davis is from Seattle. That's my little brother. I was just wondering, you must have saw the shows there. You know, they have a Noah Davis thing, but I just thought because you're from Seattle.
Well, she's a transplant to Seattle.
I'm a transplant.
But we're recording, so please use the mic, Mr. Taylor.
All right,
I'm a
okay.
transplant everywhere.
All right. So, do you want me to take on that same question?
Mentors,
about mentors?
I would love it, please,
All
take
right.
it.
My mama was my mentor. No,
There you go.
that
there
was
you
a
go.
mentor. My
There
first
you go.
mentor was
There
my
you go.
7th grade teacher. Is that how we're doing this? I'm talking about my 7th. That was my mentor, and seriously, I'm being serious.
I hear you, but could you use the
Oh.
mic? And 2, we're gonna. This is a
I'm
question
used to
with
this,
a
you know.
beginning, a middle, and an end.
Like an essay.
It's like an essay, an intro. You got it. Okay, do it. We were hanging last night, so I'm just giving you a hard time.
I'm still nervous. I'm still nervous.
Come on.
Okay, so the question was
Mentors in your life.
mentors.
Should I prompt you with James Jarvet as well as your
No.
mom?
Yeah, my mom did need a point, and my mom was a domestic worker, and she worked for of course, people who had money and that were affluent, and a lot of times they had artwork. So I think I started seeing artwork then, but actually before James Jarvet, who was my 7th grade teacher who went to school here in Berkeley, and her husband was a basketball coach, but I met her when I was in the 6th grade because, anyway, I met her in the 6th grade. And, when the basketball team would go, I traveled with the basketball team often because I know all the players. And when they would talk to the coach, I would talk to her. And the first painting I ever made was that house. And it was based on a Truman Capote story that I read. And but then I also went to school. That was a mentor of mine. because at her house I would see ceramics and things like that. I actually introduced her to James Gervais, and we remained friends throughout my life. Teresa Escarino, Pinkham Escarino, and I also would consider Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez as mentors, because when I was in 7th grade, Richard, their brother, I would look at his drawings on his peachy or on his margin. I'm like, damn, you're going foreshortening. You know what I mean? How do you do that? So I was looking at art very early. Then I remember taking a ceramics class with my teacher, who we called Mr. O. It was Mr. Oshesky. But I played sports most, but I'd go visit with Hernandez brothers who lived a few blocks away. And of course they started a magazine, and I think it's a popular magazine, a comic book, excuse me, Love and Rockets. And they sort of raised the bar because I didn't think I could draw. I thought the prerequisite to being an artist was draftsmanship. So, I like to draw and make things, but, peer pressure. Everybody in my neighborhood played sports. So I, played baseball, basketball, all that stuff. And then I took my first art class actually in Laney, and took an etching class. And after I dropped out of UCSB, I went over there. I was a journalism major and cultural anthropology. And I'll bring that up because when I did my last exhibition, and I asked Khalil Joseph to help me out, it was based on a book that I read called Wizard of the Upper Amazon. And it was a story that I told Bob. I sat with Bob Marley after a show, and that's when I didn't know what to do with the third room at the Blumenthal Gallery. And I said, let's reenact the Bob Marley, my meeting with Bob Marley and all of that stuff. So I kind of took this sort of crazy path. Like James Gervais once told me, sometimes the straight line has to be crooked. So my thing was, I went sort of roundabout, but it was also not having that many mentors, but not really like feeling like, I took journalism and then I took I went anthropology, journalism, business, interior design, but I don't like to tell people that. Because, it was fear. I wanted to do something art related, but I was always, do I draw well enough? Maybe I should just do that. And then I ended up being a nurse for 10 years, right? In the state hospital. But that's when I started taking painting from Mr. Gervais because I worked the second shift. And he finally said, stop taking my class. Why don't you transfer it? But I didn't know anything about an art school. I knew about SC. My neighbor played at SC and played football. My brothers loved basketball. I knew about UCLA and the Bruins. I didn't know about art school.
But you got it now.
Yeah,
So you got mentors and origins covered right there. So I'm gonna move over to Emily. Emily, why don't you do a double dip then? Mentors and origins.
Okay. Well, luckily, I have some mentors here today, as was mentioned before I went to UC Irvine and studied with Bridget Cooks here. So it's kind of incredible, 10 years, like almost full circle, to be in this room again with mentors, to be colleagues. And I remember being in Bridget's class, and it's weird to even speak to you as Bridget. But I remember taking African American women in visual arts and African American photography. And at the beginning of every class, at the beginning of the quarter, Bridget would say, Bridget also attended UC Irvine in undergrad, and would say, I only teach classes that I wasn't able to take when I was in school. So having these classes being focused on artists of African descent, I mean, it was because I took these classes that I'm sitting with you today. Like, there's no way that any of this would have happened if it wasn't sitting in those classes. And I remember the building, and I remember seeing Carrie Mae Weems. Like, I was introduced to Lorna Simpson, who I was in conversation with just a couple of months ago. It's incredible to kind of have these moments be so important to your not only education, but how you think and are politicized through the world. It was taking these very specific art historical classes and learning about art history through these artists and through the work of Bridget. And then also Jackie Francis. I went to CCA in the Visual and Critical Studies program, and Jackie is now the head of that program, and I was under her, as she was like a direct mentor for my thesis, which was looking at Adrian Piper, William Flaubert, and Hussein. So to also be on this panel with Jackie is incredible, and to think of also with this symposium and thinking about the Studio Museum in Harlem being on the West Coast and being in San Francisco as its first iteration of this traveling show, I think it speaks directly to California as a site and specific, a specific art world, I guess, a very different West Coast aesthetic. And not only the artwork that is produced, the artists that are working here, but then also the institutions that are created and maintained here. So for me, it was really important to bring Black Refractions to San Francisco, specifically to MOA as its first iteration, to be on the West Coast, but also to be the only mission-specific institution to host this exhibition. So there will be in the 5 other venues, none of the other venues are dedicated to artists. So to have this be presented here also, I think, is making kind of an argument for the inherent value of art, of these institutions dedicated to artists of African descent, and the way that this artwork will be seen and received by other audiences. So this exhibition will go on to the Gibbs Museum in South Carolina next, which was actually desegregated the same year that the Studio Museum was founded in 1968. So it's, I think, really important for me thinking about the exhibitions that we put on, and then the artists that we engage with at MOA to think specifically about not only the Bay Area, but California and our presence nationally, and as well as international exhibitions as well.
Thanks a lot, Emily. Mariane, could you speak a little bit about origins in any way you want to? I think you obviously talked about your geographical origins, but you could be someone who is supporting the work of musicians. You could be someone supporting the work of writers. You could be someone supporting the work of scientists. Why art? Were you an artist growing up? What is it about artistic production?
Yeah, origin is a huge, I don't know if it is issue. I sort of reconcile with the idea of origin because I was born in New Caledonia, and New Caledonia is a French territory that was annexed by the French, where the group of people who were living there, as many other parts, which are Kanak. So when you're a kid, you are not Kanak, and you're not the white group, which are called the Kadosh. So I was living in that, a space where I was sort of by myself, Somali, Muslim, African, in a sort of a Aboriginal structure in Oceania. And then I grew up in Somalia, where we had to leave because of the war we moved to France. But believe it or not, I'm a third generation of French people. So when we arrived in France, it was like, the airport, the plane, automatic door. We didn't have to go through any refugee or, AIDS. And so when we came, and why I'm saying that story is because I've never found my place anywhere. And I'm not interested in finding my place anywhere. So I'm taking advantage of every possibilities that I have. So luckily when I arrived in America, I could tick every boxes. So Black, Muslim, European, French, African, all of them, and women. So I have been interested in creating opportunities for people who would be in the same situations. So my idea was to believe that I wasn't alone and there would be other contemporaries that would be in the same situation. And why artists? Is because I thought I was going to be an artist too. So I'm a failed artist, which means that I can understand the frustrations and the aspirations of being an artist. So I took on working with artists of African descent. Not that they were the most vulnerable, but they were the strongest. And the strongest with a voice that wasn't often heard. And when I started the gallery 7 years ago, in Seattle, of all places, because I didn't have a choice, they were looking at me like I was some sort of a, alien. I don't have any relationship with Black people, so I don't know why I would buy Black artists. I know, no, most of the people who did the corp, the one who was sent to Africa, the Peace Corps, yeah, they will come and they will, the best audience in Seattle, because they could have understand, they went to Africa, they could sort of, how many times have I been asked if I was on the photograph? So you have a photograph from Anik Sidibe from the 70s, a cute little African girl. I know I look young, but that young, it's a bit too much. So I had to go through a lot of stereotypes. But now it changes. Now they are seeing the artists for who they are and not with their, origin. And they kind of are responding. They always say, oh, Seattle takes time. But I think because they're not exposed, because they're so far away from Africa, and they don't have much of a relationship with the continent. So to go back to the idea of to the origin, I for instance, I'm going to be part of an art fair in 2 weeks, which is the Armory Show, and it's going to be my 4th solo presentation of a Black female artist, and I will continue so until they don't look at the color. So I have very much, because I kind of cancel all forms of colors, because when people see me, they either think I'm the artist, but rarely the dealer, and because they don't see much of that diversity out there. And in most of places where I am internationally, I'm the only one. I'm the most visible, most helpful. So I have to, show off. So I try to be the best dressed. And you are. I will try to have the best presentation. I think it's been for years I haven't used any white walls in my booth. It's either black, mostly black, recently pink. This year will be green. So I don't want to keep on talking about that, but yeah, that's where I have been placed in terms of origins, anywhere and nowhere.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Henry. Since you're so famously known for drawing and sketching and even painting in the past audience, it seems apropos to ask you about your audience now. Like, who are the people that you're making work for? And that can be a question of multiple. Are they artists who are your peers? Are they artists of the past? Are they people of the present? Are the people who you are studying in your studio? Are they from photographs? Can you tell us a little bit about who you want to engage your work?
You know, I think I'm sort of, I think I'm sort of spontaneous, and I just like to work. I sometimes don't always have a game plan, you know? I just kind of like I don't want to sound cliches, I just do it. I just want to do it. You know what I mean? And, you know, so no, it varies. I mean, you know, I live near Skid Row, and most of the people who occupy Skid Row are Black people. So sometimes it's just right outside my door, but sometimes it's just inside my door. You know, I'm sure if she came over, I'd want to paint her. You know. You know, and are you? You know what I mean?
Oh, that's good. Appreciate you.
Yeah, but I think the portraits are just. I just feel like I don't really think about that. I just feel like, I mean, you know, I see something and it resonates and I just do it, you know. And I just, you know, I might think about something like maybe, sometimes I work into it, but sometimes I might be thinking about, say, a brother of mine in Texas and that whole, you know, Texas or something. And that takes a little longer, but I know if I do a portrait, I get like results. And you know what I mean? So you know, so they feel more accountable about my day. Like, oh, I did something, and instead I just, you know, it's less of a struggle. I mean, I might, you know, might not be able to work it out or think I'm not working it out, but you know, that's just one way I, you know, work. And but really, you know, I could be driving and I could see somebody at McDonald's bumming change, and I'm like, you know what, why don't I just make it? I don't know what I'm gonna do with this video. So I'll just drag somebody in and say, how much do you think you're gonna make? You know, bumming money. Oh, I might make about $20. Well, if you come to my studio, I'll pay you 40. You know what I mean? So that's, you know, and then and then there's other type of work, you know. So sometimes, you know, like say a painting called Warning Shot Is Not Required. I mean, I didn't have models for that. You know, I just thought about an idea, a concept or something, you know. But you know, the Blum and Poe show, you know, I was thinking about Diebenkorn, you know, or something. But it, you know, it just changes, I swear. I just you know, and then like you know, there was a thing about how social media I was looking at some of the questions. Well, like there's certain things that just pop up. You might be thinking about something else and like, whoa, I'll do that. But I think, you know, some things just come up, just, you know. So, I
know.
But you know what I mean? But that's nervous energy. Sometimes I just gotta do things. You know what I mean? I just don't, you know, I don't mind.
Yes, you got it. Emily, you sort of answered the question about audiences in some way, but I'll ask you if you want to amplify that in any way, and then you can move us on to the last keyword, which is dreams.
Okay, I can do this together. I think when I think of audiences or how I work or who I work for with, I think mostly of the artist and working as a curator and organizing exhibitions is really working for and with the artist to realize a dream, the artist's dream, in presenting their work and presenting a platform for their work to be seen at the Museum of the African Diaspora in this inherently politicized space and what it means to present work here. So we have Sadie Barnett. There is she. There she is. It was a pleasure to work with her in presenting her work on our first floor in connection with Black Refractions, and I've been wanting to work with her for a long time and thinking about the Studio Museum and the legacy of the Artist in Residence program. and I said this before, but I was thinking about the most Bay artist to ever come out of that program is definitely Sadie Barnett. There's no question. In the way that she thinks about specifically Oakland, Bay Area, California. So it was, again, like a pleasure to work with her in creating this immersive installation, into thinking about what we could do together, working with registrars, preparators, her gallerist, Charlie James, in kind of collaborating and presenting, creating a platform for that. And I think with presenting solo shows and even presenting and the work of independent curators, I think that's a really important component of MOAD, in that we have, as a non-collecting institution, we have the space, we have the platform to present the work of independent curators, such as Jackie Francis and Kathy Zur, when they created Where Is Here, which is on our 3rd floor. But to be able to, again, work with curators who are not necessarily attached to specific institutions in order to show that work that has always been done.
Mariane, about dreams. I think you sort of talked about it in some ways, in terms of.
No, I haven't talked about my dreams.
Okay. Do I need water?
Maybe aspirations. Dreams. I've been to. I'm going to refer to a name. We talked about Basquiat as an exceptional. Yes, I hear a lot of these noises in the art market and the art world that there is exceptionalism. So not all Black artists need to be in this environment. So we have handpicked, we have selected few of them. So of course Basquiat has been selected way before we could even think of showing his work in an African descent sort of an environment. So I went to the Louis Vuitton Foundation, which has the biggest exhibition of Jean-Michel Basquiat. And in that exhibition, there were 7 floors filled with all of his work. 7 floors and 12 galleries. And I've never seen, for one artist, that much attention. Let's forget about black or white. So I question how many of these works belong to African descent institutions. How many of this work belong to African descent collectors or collections? And so I'm dreaming that there would be artists in that kind of a structure, which would come from collections from African descent collectors and loaned by museums and so on. And we also mentioned, we talked about the auction homes. I'm not a fan of auctions. Actually, I hate them. I do anything to not be part of any auctions now, maybe because I'm working with artists that are young and emerging, but I think it can break the ascendance of an artist. And I don't look at auctions as a reflection of the actual market of an artist. It's just some guys playing around. And so I'm dreaming that there will be an equal opportunity for African descent collectors to collect living artists, to be able to re-own some of the not living artists, and I'm also very skeptical of this idea of selling blue chip artists to. I actually want to keep Rothko here, and I'm going to put my artist next to it, so he doesn't move around, because the prestige of a collection is also from their peers, and I don't think it is the artists who should suffer from a poor management and some, and some other, business or bad business from trustees and board members. But I think we have to be able to find a balance where you have the older artists or more important artists defined as more important artists along with new artists, because if they are selling these artists, I want to know how they acquired them. Have they sold some Monet to buy a Rothko? Oh, and so on. So that idea, because I'm a very, very proud person, I always see a part of dark charity in there. And it has to be, and I'm not demoting or anything that you have been talking about, because I think that's necessary and there has to be. But maybe we should look around some guys who have been, very kosher. The hashtag #MeToo guys who are still in some collections that I'm not going to name, that should sort of be removed from those collections, and we should keep a certain integrity on the type of artists and their political views. And get rid of these guys and then bring some, more deserved. So that's my dream. She doesn't make me sleep much.
Mr. Taylor, dreams as an artist, dreams as a collector, which we learned a little bit about last night, that you collect work, some of which you buy, some of which you trade.
Yeah, I got some Sadie Barnett.
So, your dreams as an artist, as a collector. Yeah. Your mic.
Really things. I guess, when I think about the symposium, I like to see more of this. This is like something I think that didn't happen too off the back. Or maybe I just didn't know because I wasn't invited. So, I mean, not that I should be. I'm just saying that this is a good thing. This is definitely a positive, and this is something that, I like to see more of. And I got kind of freaked out by Let's Go shit.
Liza Chili and Melvin Van Peebles.
Yeah. Looking at it again.
I know.
He's gonna turn around any second now, and he's gonna ask a question from the audience.
It's not a dream.
And it's not a dream. It's not a dream.
But God. Well, just that sort of fair representation. That it's very simple. You know what I mean? It's just simple. It's like just that sort of equal opportunity or something. You know what I mean? Just that. Because I just remember like when someone said, "Not you knocking on doors." I did a lot of knocking on doors. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden they just think, "Oh, yeah, I just popped up." No, I have people calling me. That's when I called you. 20 years ago. So those things are changing, and I'm happy to see, other artists get love. They don't have to, just eat top ramen. No, for many years I got it. I don't know. I'm just happy. I'm happy to see the love. People just trying to, put people on. I mean, come on. I was yesterday when I was looking at the question, I was thinking about when baseball was just Negro leagues. You know what I mean? Ain't it bad? Sometimes we just gotta bring them on. You know what I mean? Make it a little more exciting. Or something like that. That's what I mean. Can you imagine that's all. You like basketball?
You're a Laker fan. I don't want to talk to you.
I like the player.
Like I said.
You don't have to be an artist and be in my gallery for me to love you. You know what I mean? I like good work. I like a good player.
And high noon, a little past. It's time to open up the door to the audience.
Kick to the curb.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Do I need a mic or no? I think I can project.
Yeah, you can project and we can reiterate your questions.
Okay. Okay. The thing is, I do a bit of art education with Moed, And some of my colleagues and I oftentimes lament the fact that we are not, when we were getting our educations and studying and so forth, and were interested in art, oftentimes we weren't sure about the various occupations and roles and the underpinnings of museums and galleries. And oftentimes when we're out educating young people and trying to help them get an idea of the world of art, they don't know about the various things that they can do, the various roles that they can have, and the experiences educationally that they can have. How do we as a community of artists, etc., teach young people about more than the security guard, more than the person who takes their tickets, more than the artist, and all of those ways of being involved and being creative. And sometimes we cry about the fact that we didn't know that when we were coming
Oh, is it free to go in, huh? But no, I hear you. I'm with you.
So yeah, the question was, how do we expose young people to the potential in any number of fields, among them artist, gallerist, curator, exhibition director, education directors, etc. Mariane.
So I can just say for myself, because an artist is a different situation. The art dealing is a business. It's a pure business. It's you bring money in and you have money out. It's a retail. How you transform and how you brand and how you put yourself out there, this is marketing. But it is not something, it's not something that you learn in any, any school. There are a lot of funky books, how to be an art dealer in 7 days, and all of these things. You can Google that and see, how to be an art dealer. You see really funny, but
it would have been helpful if you had mentors.
Of course. I mean, I lied a little bit. My mentor was Olivia Pope. So I just took her and applied to the art business. And so kicking doors and kicking other parts of bodies. So the idea is to say, okay, I'm just going to register, I'm just going to open my business, and I need a set of artists, and they have to be good, and I need to help with the production and so on. But these are the things that you don't necessarily do with an estimated, budget. If I tell you how much I spend when I started my business, probably when I would die, you will find out about the numbers that I put on the table. You don't need a huge amount you just need a space. You need some 2 or 3 artists, not more than that, and just build slowly. And I was very fortunate to work with African descent artists because I didn't realize that there was a huge wave coming on my way, and I was like, okay, I need to take this wave. And it was really, very fortunate in terms of timing. If I had done that, no, it wouldn't have been possible. So the timing is also important, I would say.
Emily, do you want to add anything about exposure for a younger generation to possibilities?
Yeah, I would say internships. I started the internship at Moab, kind of never left in different ways. When I started graduate school with Jackie, so it was because of wanting to see what was inside of a museum, not only in the galleries but in the administration offices. Right? I think it's only through working with my colleagues, Dimitri, Mark, Director of Communications, what that looks like. The designs that we have a designer, Paul Flaley. I work with my colleague Soleil, who ran the Emerging Artists Program, and finding out what a registrar does, and conditioner reports at work, and styrofoam, or not, bubble wrap, and crates, and shipping organizations, I think it really comes, for me, it came from the experience of just being in space and watching mass elections.
Yes, please.
Are the people that live of African descent, or are you hoping, people that sell the things that come to your opening? The thing with Henry, I mean, there's gallery representation, but people who collect your work, want to sort of continue to look up the provenance and, who you have made it for and why you made it. Is it important to you that you try to sort of reach out to
So the question is for Mariane, in terms of the people that she works with, in terms of sales, our hopes to sell to people who are of African descent, to increase the number of people who are interested and obviously come into the gallery to look at the work of artists of African descent.
I am very proud to have a strong collective of African descent collectors. Some are extremely, educated, they know, they've been collecting for years, and some others are, I don't know your age, as young as you are, and I help them through the process. So I'm very, I go through, I understand it's an expense, and I facilitate as much as I can to especially younger collectors through payment plans, and I'm going to wait a little bit and I'm just going to reserve that work for you, and in 3 months you can pay me later. So I am extremely encouraging a lot of the younger collectors, because if they pick now, in 10 years their collection will have more and more relevance. And they shouldn't wait until it happens to do it. So I encourage young collectors to collect young artists. And they should forget about Kehinde or Henry Taylor. But he's collecting them, so it's very encouraging.
All right. No, but I have, I was looking for this text, maybe Kim, like A.C. Hutchins, different people on boards. I remember being in Pittsburgh and I saw the August Wilson museum, and it was sort of dilapidated. That just devastated me, and I've come to know like Swiss Beats, for example, and he said it was because of me that Jay-Z started collecting. You know what I mean? But they used to laugh. He said, Henry, they used to laugh at me when I was collecting. So now I even told Blum and Poe, I said, look, I'm going to give this one to Swiss. You know what I mean? So I had to be an advocate, and I had to tell them, So I know there's paintings that I've painted, like maybe of my mama. And I'm like, damn, how'd that get in that woman's house? You know what I mean? I didn't know where it went. I can't get it back. I needed the money.
I knew this was going to be like this. Other questions?
My question sort of piggybacks.
But that's changing. That's all I'm saying. But it's changing. And then, like I have ball players, but I thought about this 20 years ago. My nephew, you know what I mean? What you doing with that drug money? Buy some paintings. We gotta put them on. And it's like, no, but I ain't got to put these shoes. That's real talk. Now my nephew's all up on me. No, but that's all I gotta say.
My question. My question kind of piggybacks onto my colleague Cynthia's question, and because I'm an art, and ties into a conversation Naima and Emily and I were having earlier. So we go out into the schools And I was fortunate enough to have been raised in a so-called shithole country where art education is compulsory from K through high school. But then I come here to this country and think, well, this is the United States, and why not have art? And really, we go to the so-called Title I, and I've learned, having been here a few years, that when you give something a title, it's a way of, when you ascribe certain people certain titles, is a way of circumscribing their possibilities. So the question is really real. When some kids, their first experience of art is this museum. But a few years ago, I did research about the major arts institutions in the Bay Area. And I counted, so it speaks to the question of critical diversity. So critical diversity happens at MOAD because that's MOAD's position. But for years, I still get, every year, calls, letters from the museums of San Francisco. And when I talk to someone on the phone, I always say, when I get a conversation with the director of this museum and talk to them about the African and Oceanic Arts Department, where it seems to the general public, this is what we are doing, we contemporary Black people are doing. So kids, when they go to a museum, like some I will not mention, that's their idea of what Black people and people of color are producing. It's like our traditional arts. So my understanding is that the institutions are the last, arts institutions, and I'm a performing artist, are the large, and to our white allies, I say, I'm not pointing fingers at you, but it is the last bastion of white hegemonic power. Because if you look at critical diversity in the institutions, it doesn't exist. So if your boards are of one color, they're going to impact. And let's talk, you said, Mariane, thank you. You spoke the truth. It is about money. So if you're going to a school in certain neighborhoods, it is about money because it's the tax base that determines what happens. So to me, it's an act of political action for me to be a teaching artist for MOAD. But and actually, I want to parallel with other arts institutions because I am an actor and I work for various other arts institutions in the Bay Area. I used to get this question: how can we reach the Black public? And I say, well, you want some Kenyans? You want some Kenyans? I can talk to some Kenyans. But now you see, you produce Black Odyssey, kills a box office. You produce Ain't Too Proud to Beg, shatters all box office records. But still, institutionally, Eric Ting was an earthquake in the Bay Area. The first artistic director of color in a major institution, and that institution has changed. But we still, I still go to meetings where I'm the only person of color, and it just feels wrong. And so what do? I just won't subscribe to some places, but it's a small act and it doesn't feel like it's changing fast enough for the young children that are growing up, because creativity is innate in all of us. But I think they understand that creativity is for some people whose pictures are on the wall, and I am removed from that because I don't get art, I don't get theater, I don't get music. So how, it's a very critical question, because again, you're asking children to paint on postage stamps rather on these beautiful white canvases that we see here.
Thank you so much for coming. Well, on that note, I do think we have our charge to the barricades, everyone. We know what we're supposed to do. We're going to break for our lunch and then return at 12:50. There's a performance
Okay, so we are going to break and go to the first floor for lunch. We definitely encourage you to mingle amongst yourselves, our panelists, for 30 minutes, and then we are gonna move back up into the gallery spaces because we wanna activate the artwork today and have you experience what we're talking about. So Push Dance Company will be staged in the second and third floor galleries. I'll let you know downstairs when it's time to move up and to enjoy the dance performances and the artwork.
Okay, what's that?
And she's so cool, and it was important. She had you're right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I got lucky. There was no person. She was just like, I'm not coming with you. Like, I want to see these ducks this way. Like these ducks. So I'm really
There she goes.
but I will let you know. That's one thing that on the radar that you have Great job. Good to meet
They still have the table that for now. Yes. I mean, other than like and of course, so I said to watch they were all just saying. residents.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might want to apply for that, just to get around, you know, like, you know, when I used to try like, I want to say, no, so you don't want to, you don't do it every month. Every hour a week, I do it every week. So, you know, it's
Yeah.
I do.
So you know, it's kind of politics.
You know what I mean? Yeah, you
Right.
Let's keep it. You see, that's how. You ain't gonna ever be.
Oh, I don't know what.
And I will show you one
I like that.
I feel like I'm being lectured again.
Did you Google Henry Taylor?
It's on the TV.
It's great that we got to see him in a context of a restaurant. I loved your hair, but yeah, I was gonna give you my email.
Stays, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go eat.
Wow. Yeah.
I am. More before I walk in. But I can't even get yeah. Not here. Not here. But, you know, it's like I off or I off. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Henry. No. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This calling me. I ain't going nowhere, man.
Yes, yes. Going downstairs?
Yeah.
Oh my God. For the books?
Yeah.
Big one. Yes. Thanks. Yeah, we went to Chile. Right at the.
You went to the City Lights?
Yeah.
So we went and we didn't drink water.
Under the table. Yeah, they probably and you were and then the actual
My invite. Where's my invite? You thinking of me? Just asking the photo over here.
He's a true artist.
Where were you? Don't worry.
I was not able to take from. So what should I do? Tell me the highest I can do.